Hello and welcome to the State of the Union Watch Party here at IPFW in the Honors Center. Thank you very much for joining us. Our sponsors this evening are the Department of Political Science as well as the Honors Program. And we want to specifically thank Farrah Combs and Michelle Shawver for helping set this up and make this space available to us. They're both with the Honors Program here at IPFW. I also want to very quickly thank the folks at College TV for recording it and making it available through College TV. I encourage you to watch the excellent programming you can find there. And I want to thank the chair of our department, Mike Wolf, for really being the reason we're here tonight. He put a lot of this together and put the effort into it, so thank you very much, Mike. I will now introduce the rest of the members of the panel. Obviously, Mike Wolf, chair of the Department of Political Science. Next to him, Elliot Bartkey, James Lutz on the end there, and then over here, Craig Ortsey and Jamie Toole. We have a few questions, or I have a few questions, I should say, that I'm going to ask the panelists, and then once we're done, we'll go to question and answer from the audience. When you have a question, I will ask you to use the microphone so that we can get it on the recording. And on that note, I think that it's safe to say that people will be writing entire books about, if not the entire first term, certainly the first year of the Trump presidency. However, you only get a couple of minutes to answer this first question, and it's really two questions, so choose to answer whichever part you wish. What do you think has been the biggest success of the first year of President Trump's tenure in office, and what do you think is the biggest shortcoming for President Trump in his first year in office? And to make it a little bit easier, we'll start with Jim Lutz on the end there.
Well, I gave some thought to this, and one of the things that Trump has been successful in doing is finding a way to send his views to the American public, basically through tweeting and twittering and things that I don't really understand. But presidents have been able, through time, to bring up issues and to use their position as formulator and persuader of public opinion. And I think in many respects, President Trump has been more successful in doing that. The biggest shortcoming with that is sometimes the things he tweets, rather than not just being controversial, but not being very factual.
Elliot?
Well, I haven't thought about it. But because I haven't thought about it, that means I can talk not as a political scientist. So I would say the economy, because the economy is, if you don't look at the stock market yesterday and today. So we actually did this 2 days ago, because we're all bad historians too. So the biggest success clearly is the economy.
And I should point out that Elliot has taught a class recently on the Trump presidency, and we'll be offering that again fairly soon, as I have heard. Professor Wolf. And that is a good segue to Mike Wolf.
Yes, and I just would like to congratulate those students in that class. They've already written a book collectively, and they were great work. So I think the presidency as an institution has not been as affected by a single individual quite like this in a long time. And so that's probably a success for him to have not come into the role of the presidency in the same way. But we'll talk later about what that means for strategy. But that's also a downside. I think our political institutions don't have a whole lot of constitutional definition. And so I think that the fact that norms and a cultured institution like that is also somewhat damaged when you have people taking a different direction. So his success, I think, and his failure are two sides of the same coin.
Jamie.
Yeah, I'd say that his biggest policy success in my book concerns the judiciary, getting Neil Gorsuch on at the Supreme Court, and also working on getting a lot of quite young conservative justices in the pipeline, people who, because of life tenure, can be on the federal courts for a long time.
Mm-hmm. And in some respects, in line to possibly be members of the Supreme Court.
Well, exactly. So if you become a district judge, you might move up, you might become an appellate judge, and some of them someday may become Supreme Court justices. So that's a very long-term. Potentially long-term success. And I think it's one that, politically speaking in this country, conservatives have taken very seriously. A lot of conservatives vote based on court nominations, and I think a lot of liberals, not nearly as many liberals, do. And it's one of the most powerful, powers of the presidency, and he's using it.
Craig.
I've got the mic. So yeah, I'd actually agree with Dr. Toole that probably his greatest success has been the changes in the judiciary that he has been able to push, what is like 130 nominees or something like that to the district courts through the process over the last year or so. So I guess I don't have much else to add to that. But I mean, I'd say the biggest failure that he's had is his misuse of the bully pulpit. As I tell my students, the bully pulpit does not mean noogies and purple nurples. But that's how Trump has been using the bully pulpit, the fact that he is the central figure in American political life. And he has used that position, I think, to kind of push around his political enemies and try to excoriate the people with whom he disagrees. And that is not at all what that position is supposed to be like. Again, as Mike was saying, going after some of the important norms in American politics.
I think since we've heard this from several of you, sometimes what the president says is not necessarily doesn't match the policies that the president actually advocates for or that he might be pushing for very specifically. This next question will be for Jamie and for Jim. They both happen to teach international relations and courses on national security. To begin with, do you think the foreign policies he's pursued do match his rhetoric, or is there a real big disconnect between the two of them? And once again, we'll start with Jim.
Well, I think there is a major disconnect. I think his attempted foreign policies do match his rhetoric. He has been very conscious of attempting to do things with immigration and in North Korea as it's come up, and getting out of the Paris Accords for climate change. A little bit less so in the case of China, but actually China is a currency manipulator, and he's going to take China on until he realized that it would have China to take on North Korea, which actually is a very appropriate change of policy. So I think his rhetoric and his foreign policy goals are in keeping each other. I think he's not very well in trying to accomplish them. He has no background in foreign policy, and he seems to disdain the use of the experts that are available to him and go off. He knows better than his experts, and he doesn't have the background to do so.
Do you think that part of the reason the rhetoric and doesn't match all the policies is because of all the professionals, the people who've made their life in the civil service and the foreign service, are slow to move, or are they a moderating factor?
I think some of them are a moderating factor, but I think also many of them in protest have resigned, which is a principled thing to do at one level, but it means you're being replaced by people that will pursue the policies as presented to them. That would be it's very much a Hobson's choice for the people that are in that position. You're either principled and resign, or you stick it out because you need to help moderate the policies. I think there's some moderation that has occurred, and that's part of it. But his own approach tends to be unfocused, and that shows up in the inconsistencies as well.
And of course, part of the challenge for him has been that there are a number of openings that have not been filled in terms of foreign service, and that obviously makes it difficult to implement foreign policy. Jamie, do you think that the foreign policy has matched the rhetoric?
I agree with Jim that that the rhetoric matches the foreign policy aims. However, there have been, I think, really no foreign policy successes that come close to matching the rhetoric. The rhetoric, of course, is America first, right? And America first is a concept that really has not been defined by the administration in any coherent way that could be operationalized in the conduct of U.S. foreign policy. Moreover, and I think more importantly, the policies that the administration has pursued in the first year have weakened rather than strengthened the U.S. National security and economic position around the world. And I think if you look at a variety of subjects, you'll see that China from day one, the apparent misunderstanding of the One China policy in the first days of office, and then a U-turn on that. Getting rid of the Trans-Pacific Partnership or our involvement on that on day one, whether you like the TPP or not, that was a tremendous lever to use against Chinese influence, designed specifically, though not explicitly by Obama, specifically to contain China's influence. And so I think the biggest policy shortcoming in the foreign realm of the presidency so far is China ceding an unprecedented amount of influence to China over the first year. And we see other things too. I won't go through the list, but I think I think that the administration is going to have to really up its game if it's really going to not just talk rhetorically about America first, but actually pursue policies that will strengthen rather than weaken the U.S. position in the world. And the last thing I'll say is to comment further on Jim's very good point about the Foreign Service. This is an unprecedented hollowing out of the Foreign Service, which is our primary tool, of course, in the conduct of foreign policy. You can go back 100 years and see nothing comparable to this. And it's not only, as Jim rightly said, that many people are resigning. It's also that whole layers of the State Department are vacant. And the administration's shown no interest in filling posts. The clear majority of our ambassadorial appointments are vacant right now without even anyone nominated 1 year into the presidency. And that includes, for example, I just looked at the list, almost every single country in the Middle East, apart from Israel and Bahrain and Djibouti. Look at the North Korea crisis. We have neither an ambassador nor a nominee to South Korea, nor do we have an Assistant Secretary of State for Asia and Pacific Affairs. So just, a few examples.
I don't want to undervalue the work that ambassadors do, but for a lot of those offices, the countries you're talking about, there are individuals, there are professionals there who are still there, even though there's no ambassador. So it's not like there's no contact going on there. It's just missing the ambassador.
Yeah, but it's usually missing the ambassador and a couple levels down. I mean, it again, depending on the country, at the State Department itself, whole upper levels of political appointees, again, appointee positions remain vacant. So it's common. Not only it's common now throughout the State Department to have people operating like 2 levels above what their expertise should be allowing them to. And this gravely weakens U.S. foreign policy. This should not even be a partisan issue. It's a stunning thing that this is happening.
Mm-hmm. Now, there is, of course, you said this is unprecedented. We go back 100 years. We haven't seen anything like this. Are the policies that he's pushing really that different? Are they that markedly different from other presidents?
I think in some ways they are, and others clearly not. I mean, there's usually a lot of continuity president to president, even when it looks like there isn't. From Bush to Obama, there was a lot more continuity than people expected. Here, I think you do see some real differences, at least, certainly in the treatment of the State Department as a tool of foreign policy, also, of course, on Russia, and our treatment of allies and relations with them. Also trade, which is really, really interesting. Because whether you like free trade or not, one thing that's at least very interesting is how much President Trump has broken with his own party's history in supporting free trade. So I'm not saying that that's either good or bad for the economic strength of the U.S. at this point. I'm just saying that that's a marked difference. But there are a number of continuities, no doubt. There always are.
Jim?
I think that one of the other things, just to add in, is that the State Department was one of the smallest bureaucracies that we ever had to begin with. It's under compared to the domestic bureaucracies. So it was already small because nobody cares about the State Department to begin with. And so to have all the and all the posts that are not filled in a very small department makes the impact much greater. If we had the same number of generals and admirals not present in the Pentagon, I'm not sure anybody would notice. But this is a very noticeable gap in the State Department.
I could ask the same question, but shift the focus to domestic policy or just the presidency in general. And so I'm going to do that, and I'll direct it to those who just finished teaching the Trump presidency. Elliot and Mike, what do you think? Do the policies match the rhetoric? And is he that different from his predecessors, plural predecessors, not just the most recent?
So more and more, campaigning and governing are 2 different things. And for a long time, there's been a disconnect between the 2. And as the American political order continues to disintegrate in terms of the connection that parties serve between the people and the government, and the parties themselves become split, it becomes more difficult to put together a coalition to win the election. And so you have in both parties activists on both sides going to the ideological extremes, the Republican and the Democratic Party, which is interesting because most Americans in polling still show that they're in the middle. So there's a disconnect between party activists and politicians in the House and Senate on both parties, between them and the people. And one of the reasons for that is also because what it takes to campaign. So grassroots campaigning has declined in significance as we've seen an increase in money and media. And so what we have is, in both sides, they're dependent more and more on very wealthy organizations that happen to be more extremely liberal or more extremely conservative. And so if you want to get elected, you need money, not grassroots connections anymore. And that encourages this situation. So we saw that in order to run, Hillary Clinton ran against a lot of policies that she thought were terrible, except 2 years earlier that'd been her, and a year earlier that'd been her policies, like the TAP agreements and so on and so forth, that she called the golden standard, and then now it's not. And so Donald Trump, who was never really even a Republican before he decided to run, runs to get a certain segment of the Republican Party energized and makes promises. And many of these people weren't even Republicans either. A lot of working class people that had earlier supported Democrats, and in certain cases were Obama supporters. So running, again, means, and making promises means generating money and votes to win the election. And of course, everybody was shocked, including Trump, that he won, which was a curious thing, because now you've got to do something apparently Melania was very unhappy about, and that's govern. Well, maybe he wasn't doing such a good job in the House, appears, and what's he going to do as president? So, now that's interesting because in terms of governing, I would say yes, and Jamie's right, that the most long-term significant thing clearly is the court appointments. But that's, and it appeals to the conservatives, crazy people like myself. But
he's been matching his rhetoric there. I mean, he spoke
that
about
and that he
very
has.
conservative
And normally what a president does in the first year, whether Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, is to please their base. And then you move to the center for re-election. And before Clinton, when you would do that, everybody would forget. So you please your base by taking more extreme conservative liberal positions, and then you move back to the center. That, beginning with Clinton, that doesn't work anymore because of the nature of the media that, like Rush Limbaugh, will bite your leg and not let go. And people keep listening. Or on the liberal side, the same thing. So now it's not so easy to play that game, again, given the, and again, the polarization of politics isn't really amongst the American people, it's more amongst the elites so far. So yes, he did, but the issue in terms of getting elected, re-elected, or the midterm elections is the economy. So that's even a strange thing because the president should just be talking about the economy rather than twittering stupid things that he does. That he's, okay, so that's a psychological issue. If there are any psychology professors in the audience, you can explain narcissism and tweeting and so on and so forth, the connection. But in any case, so governing is something different. The economic issues are important. But in terms of tonight, I want to bring it back to tonight because my guess, and this is not unusual, is that he's going to position himself more to the middle again. And that he's going to annoy some of his base, not unusual, because he's going to create a path to, suggest a path to citizenship, which the Democrats will then promptly denounce as racist, because he's providing way for DACA people to become citizens, but they won't do it the way they like, so it's racist. That's part of the polarization now. And, but he'll make other people happy. So again, and it's not clear, despite the ideological claims during the campaign, where he stood on a lot of issues. So I'm not surprised that he's going to be flexible on some of these issues. So I expect that tonight he's going to do something to talk about the importance of unity, bringing people together, providing a pathway to citizenship. He's going to ask for the billions of dollars to build the wall. He's going to talk about peace around the world, in the Middle East, and he'll tout his accomplishments there. But I expect the shocking part of tonight, he's going to look presidential.
Mike, does the rhetoric match the policies?
Well, in a lot of ways, I think as Elliot noted, it wasn't a normal issue-driven campaign by any means. And so we do see a considerable amount of executive orders, follow through on policies that have been very popular for the conservative movement for a long time, and his ability to implement those really through who he appointed to positions. And really, Congress has had much more of an ability to set their own agenda, which then has been clearly conservative with the Republican majorities that they have. And but you asked also about the presidency, and certainly his rhetoric running for president is matched in the institutional sense, and it's actually to his benefit in some ways. The presidency and presidents, we talk about the double expectations gap. I'm sure some of these students remember this.
If not, it's on your test this coming week.
Exactly. So, presidents, one of their issues is that they're head of state, right, the Queen of England, and they're also head of government. And those are two different roles, and they're very hard to bring together because, in effect, you have to be aggressive in your governing style, but you have to act presidential in doing so. And so you are attacked and you can't respond in kind. President Trump has not really done much in the head of state role. I don't think he has thought about that or cared about that much. And in a way, this frees him. He doesn't have one hand tied behind his back. He can be aggressive in his pursuit of policies, or just be aggressive in championing himself. And so it's an irony that in some ways that I think institutionalists would say this is not very presidential in a lot of ways. It comes through in small ways when he has a football team, at the White House, and you're supposed to act presidential, and he gives a political speech. That's usually not the time for that. Or skipping the Kennedy Center Awards and things like this. While there's very small things, institutionally, fulfilling that role as head of state, it means something. So for the institution, it's probably not good. But for him, politically, he is not battling some of the other things that we have seen recent presidents have to do. And President Bush certainly faced this. President Obama faced this, where people are vitriolic towards you, and you can't respond in kind. This president does not. He's not worried about that. So in the kind of the battle of Washington, that might actually help him. So,
Craig, you teach courses on conspiracy, culture, political culture, and certainly a lot of people have said this administration is full of the opportunities for conspiracies, or at least to talk about conspiracies, as well as the role of culture in politics or politics in culture. Is this going to be, after 1 year, I know it's only 1 year, is this an administration giving you material till the end of time, or are we overestimating the value here?
I wouldn't say until the end of time, but I might say to the end of the earth. How about that? I mean, since, what's that? The earth is flat. The end of Earth's existence on this plane. How about that? All right. Well, since I had a minute to think about this, kind of got this question ahead of time, I have sort of a long-winded answer to it. And we kind of have to start from the premise that Donald Trump is a conspiracy theorist. He's given plenty of evidence that he was one before he became president, as he was running for president, and after he became president. And so there's not really much doubt about that. Now, before the headline becomes IPFW professor says that president is ready for the tinfoil hat club, that is not at all what I mean, all right? Saying that he is a conspiracist is really no different than saying that he has any other ideological predilection at all. In fact, as Dr. Barkey is pointing out, he has not been a consistent liberal or conservative or anything else over the course of his political career except for this. He has been a consistent conspiracy theorist this entire time in public life. And so, it's not that Mueller is investigating these questions about his campaign's connections to Russia. It's the deep state reacting to their power and authority being threatened or something like that. And it's not that the FBI is looking into questions about his personal finances or whatever. It's a cabal of FBI agents who have secretly molded into the government and are now working to bring down the Trump administration. He's seeing conspiracy theories. He's seeing conspiracies really where they don't exist, which is the very definition of being a conspiracist or conspiracy theorist. I said in my first comment that he's really kind of misused the bully pulpit, right? And much of that misuse, I think, has been him spreading these conspiracy theories about his political opponents. There's plenty of opposition to Donald Trump in Washington and elsewhere in the country, but you don't need to invent a conspiracy where there isn't one. But his mindset is such that he sees it. Just like, let's say, a Marxist would see class everywhere they look in politics. The problem is that Donald Trump is seeing conspiracies everywhere where he looks in politics too. And that's made it really hard for him to act as president, to act as Professor Wolf was saying, in that head of state role, kind of bringing everyone together. If you're a conspiracy theorist, there is no such thing as bringing everyone together because there are some folks who are just out to get you. And I think this is one of the problems that he has had as president, and the fact that he hasn't been able to accomplish nearly as much as other presidents have in that first year in office is because he has that mindset. It makes it awfully difficult for him to bring people together, even folks who agree with him, to actually get anything done.
This is a presidency that people have often said hasn't gotten anything done yet. In fact, a number of things have gotten done. And so if you were writing this speech tonight for the president, what would you want to make sure he talked about as a success? And Craig, we'll go ahead and start with you this time.
I mean, I think the change to the judiciary have been really important, and getting the tax bill through. I mean, granted, that should have been a slam dunk, and it took a lot longer and a lot harder for him to get that done than it should have, but he did actually get that done. I think you can chalk that up as a win.
Now, we should point out, when you say a lot longer, you say that because the Republicans are in control of both the House, the Senate, and the House. It got done in a fairly short period of time from a legislative standpoint. It just took a little longer than one might expect with the control the Republicans have at the time.
Not so much. You look at President Reagan when he pushed through his tax cuts. He had that done within the first 100 days. George W. Bush, when he pushed through his tax cuts, he got that done right at the edge of that 100-day mark. With President Trump, it takes almost 11 months for that to get finished.
Well, but there's also the question of when he started working on it.
Sure, but if
the Affordable Care Act took up a little time at the beginning.
Sure, and that turned out to be a massive failure on his part. So I think that the fact that he isn't willing to play nice with others, or again sees conspiracies when they aren't there, has made it a lot harder for him to accomplish anything, even something that should have been relatively easy to do.
Jamie, what does he have to say tonight if you're his speechwriter?
Well, I think, as Elliot said, he just has to look presidential. I think the bar is pretty low. And no, I don't mean that in a rude way. I really don't. What I mean is that you know, as many people on the panel here have said, I mean, he's been running his presidency in a very unorthodox way, through tweeting, through conspiracy theory, through other things as well. So you know, a lot of people aren't expecting much, and of course, his critics are expecting, always expect, bad things from him. So I really don't think expectations are very high. So if he can, stands up there and gives a relatively sober speech, sticking to the teleprompter, etc., which I suppose all early indications suggest that's the plan, then he's probably done what he needs to do.
And actually, in some respects, throws people off again, because he's acted presidential, and people are labeling him as unpresidential, and he can say, as he said before, acting presidential is easy. Mike, what does he have to include?
Yeah, I mean, that point is large. Presidencies have been saved by the State of the Union address. Bill Clinton saved his presidency in the middle of a huge scandal. So they can be big moments, and especially the expectations game that Dr. Toole talked about is a big thing. And I think, as Dr. Barkey said, he has an economy he can talk quite a bit about. And so I think there's a lot there. And the Affordable Care Act stuff, that's not over. You know, Senator McCain got a lot of credit for him. He's not doing well. And if he has to resign for health reasons, then you're one appointment away from a governor in Arizona from putting that thing back on the table. And so I would not, no, it's been acted like it's a dead policy issue. I wouldn't be surprised if something does happen. We have a couple of senators actually then you face a lot of political pressure in an election year. So we'll see.
Elliot, the must include?
Must include. Well, I think that the number one issue must be the economy. I don't think he's going to talk much about the judicial branch. He'll mention it, not dwell on it, because that serves no larger purpose. He's already got those people with him. And I think he's going to talk about his successes in foreign policy. Other than my colleagues, I think he's had a lot of success in foreign policy and has a lot of potential for success in policy. For example, I think he's likely to talk about North Korea. He's got North Korea to start budging. And we can argue about that, but I do think that in the Middle East and elsewhere, we're going to hear him talk about his success in foreign policy. We can argue about it, but I expect that's going to take a lot more space than the judicial appointments.
And he can, in some respects, sound presidential. He can do that in a presidential way, but still get some arguing going on, which he kind of feeds off to some degree.
Right. And if anybody could be bad about the appointments in the Foreign Service, that could be me, because I was talking to people in the administration about a job there, and they took and then hiring me. Terrible. I'm personally insulted as a fellow narcissist.
Jim?
Well, not being a narcissist, I'm at a loss for words for the moment, but clearly he can take credit for the economy, although the economy runs in a cycle where anything in the first year of any presidency is usually from the past. Clinton did well. He inherited an economy that was improving from H.W. Bush. Lucky him. Hoover inherited a horrible economy, and nothing. It's so, but he needs to talk about that. In terms of sounding presidential, I agree that he needs to sound presidential. He probably will sound presidential, but he can undo it in a minute tomorrow morning when he starts tweeting because somebody criticizes something. And if it's a basketball player, he's not arguing with Democrats or party leaders. He's arguing with anybody who criticizes him, which is non-presidential. Being presidential is ignore some of those folks, and he can't do that. And he could, whatever good he does tonight, and if he sticks to the teleprompter and the script, he will do well because he can do that. He could undo it very quickly when he goes off script.
Yeah, things have been changing very quickly in terms of news cycles, et cetera. But Mike brought up the fact, and others did as well, we're heading into midterm elections. I know a lot of people want to talk about 2020, but let's talk about 2018 first. The Republicans have control of both the Senate and the House. Traditionally, the party of the president loses seats in the midterm election. Do we think that's going to happen? And if so, to what degree? And we'll start with Mike. You teach classes on voting elections and public opinion in Congress, so let's hear from you first.
Yeah, and I think any of the honors students that come to our summer session and we talk about midterm loss and what explains it, and it's not usually, what we will most likely, if we hold the forum, see the Democrats pick up a number of seats, if that's historical. But it's also a mechanism of political choice, that it's not a foregone conclusion. And what we see historically is that these are decisions by strategic politicians that help to bring this about. And what we've seen this year is a lot of Republican chairs of committees that are going to lose their standing as the committee chair, and they say, well, I'm also going to face a tough re-election. I'm going to get out while the K Street money is good, right, on top. And in turn then, the up-and-coming Republican candidates, a lot of them will say, well, maybe this isn't the year to run, given the history. And so you have really some strategic things going on. A lot of Democrats will jump in that are up-and-coming. There's a lot of energy, negative energy that Democrats have, that aren't there on the Republican side. And so as a result, the patterns are not some just historical truism. They are decisions made and quite often missed and misplaced. And so the presidents end up saying, well, this was their fault, right? Barack Obama, he's done because to 2010. President Bush, he's done 2006. President Clinton will never win re-election. We misinterpret the patterns that are going on here. And so we're likely to see Democrats do pretty well if history holds up, and we have certainly seen the fact that a lot of Republican incumbents who would likely be really strong candidates to win re-election are out of the game. And that means that those are difficult seats to even try and hold, to raise money, to recruit a candidate, and to do all the things that wouldn't have had to be done. And the other point of this, interestingly, is we have an incumbent re-election rate that's over 90% every election. That's still going to hold. It's because the people that might have lost aren't running, right? So in effect, we have, as we'd say, the Democrats are going to put the varsity team out there, and a lot of times the Republicans are going to run a JV team, and it will be placed in the president's lap, not necessarily correctly, right? But so this is likely what we're going to see.
Jim?
I think that there will be definite losses. I think there's a lot of open seats. The Republicans, open seats are the most vulnerable because there is no incumbent. And so those are up for grabs, and in open seats, both sides get lots of money pouring in, whereas when you have an incumbent, it tends to be weighted towards the incumbent as opposed to the challenger. And I think the other sign, which is not a good sign for the Republicans, is that in state races, there's been very few situations in which a Democratic seat has been won by a Republican. There's been lots of seats where Democrats have replaced Republicans in special elections, and some of them very surprising. There's seats that you would never expect a Democrat to win, which would indicate some level of dissatisfaction at a party level because the incumbents haven't been particularly, you get a really bad incumbent who's been caught doing hand in the till or playing around with children.
Like in the bad way.
In the bad, yes. Then you're going to be defeated. But these have been people who you would expect normally to win, and they haven't.
Jamie?
Yeah, I agree with all that's been said. I want to make two other points. One, Mike mentioned the negative enthusiasm on the Democratic side, and certainly that's true. People mobilized by their anger toward Trump. I think one important factor is going to be how unified or divided Democrats are on strategy. Are you gonna play to the base in these 2018 elections? And the people who are really fired up, the people who supported Bernie Sanders, maybe the people who love Elizabeth Warren, are you going to go in that direction, or are you going to play it more conservative and try to wean back, for example, white working class voters who voted for Trump this time but maybe voted for Obama or Democrats in the past? So, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. In some districts, one might work. In another district, another tactic might work. But you want to look at how the money flows to these different races and whether there is incoherence in the Democrat strategy. And the other thing I would mention is to keep an eye on the 39% of voters who are just resolutely in favor of Donald Trump. And there are I keep reading media stories that say the president's approval rating is falling further. It hasn't fallen in a long time. It's stayed very, very steady at 39%. It's very, very solid. However, I wonder how many of them are going to turn out for a midterm congressional election. So they love Trump. They're fired up about Trump. I think they're a real force to be contended with in 2020. But are they going to, many of whom were first-time voters or hadn't voted in a long time, are they going to come out and vote for a Republican congressional candidate in a midterm election? So I think those are two interesting factors.
And we do have lower turnout in those midterm elections to begin with. Elliot, you mentioned the divisive nature, the polarization of things. You think that's going to play a role in the success or failure of the election?
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything everybody said, except one thing that's missing is that because of the polarization now, it's very likely that 2 years later there's going to be another switch, Well, even though there's the 90% incumbent, that masks the fact that it's no longer clear who's going to win every 2 years. So that's part of the polarization of American politics. And again, polarization not so much amongst your average voter, it's amongst the elites. And we're talking about never underestimate the ability of the Democrats to do stupid things, right? And so even where we're going to win now, you're going to have a lot of the party activists, like there's a demand now that you cannot be a pro-life Democrat. I mean, that's insane. But that's coming from the top of leadership. And they may do more things like that. So if the Democratic money goes the way of that Democratic ideology, then the Republicans might not have such a bad chance. You know, never, and it also depends what the president's going to do. You never know what he's going to do. We know, no matter how good he is, that CNN and MSNBC is going to say it was horrible, it was racist, and so on and so forth, even though there's no conspiracy in the media. That's just what's going to happen. Everybody knows it, no matter how good he is. And he's going to respond by saying something crazy too. So, and maybe he'll insult Mitch McConnell next week or something. We don't know these things. It's so weird in that respect that we just don't know. So, I mean, money would be on saying yes, the Democrats are going to win because that's the way it's been. But also, I think keep that larger context of the problem of American politics in mind.
Craig.
Well, I think I may have to be the contrarian just a little bit, a little of the wet blanket sort of. Structurally, the Democrats are going to have real trouble, I think, in the Senate because they're defending a lot more vulnerable seats than the Republicans are. And gerrymandering obviously is going to play a major role in the House seats, and that's going to be a problem for them too. But I think coming out of 2016, the real problem is that Trump had negative coattails. I mean, the Democrats actually picked up seats in the House and the Senate in 2016. And usually it's the opposite, right? That the Republican brings in, people if he wins the presidency, and that didn't happen. So there are just fewer vulnerable Republican incumbents out there than there would have been in a normal year. I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't forestall a wave or something like that, but it kind of reminds me of what happened with George W. Bush in 2000, that he came in with negative coattails too. And in 2002, the Republicans actually picked up seats in the House. Now, there was that whole 9/11 thing in between that might have affected what went on in that election. Minor issue. But structurally, I think the Democrats are going to have more difficulty than I think a lot of people give them credit for.
All right, let's go ahead and take some questions from the studio audience. Who has a question for one or all of the fine panelists here? Yes.
Hello, everybody. My question is about the DACA recipients. So obviously, as we all know, we keep passing these short-term funding bills that have different, things in them, like we just funded CHIP for another 6 years. But my question is, both sides kind of want a different outcome. So Republicans want money for the wall, while the Democrats want to, keep all of these DACA recipients here. So do you see either side conceding to finally pass a long-term funding bill?
Let's start with Mike on that one.
Well, this is the brinksmanship that's both a malady of American politics that comes from polarization, that we've used normal. I mean, the fact that if we had offered classes in the 1980s and 1970s, the discussion would be that there's no difference between the parties, and the budgets were easy to pass, right? And we never slowed the train down on that kind of normal stuff. And now we're in this point where people are playing brinksmanship with with the U.S. budget, and planning, and shutting the government down as a demonstration. So it's not a healthy place to start policy to begin with, especially when you're talking about a comprehensive policy. And so I just wonder, in an election year, this thing has nearly passed 2006. Interestingly, saw Democrats walk away from a comprehensive deal because they thought it would be good politics. And Barack Obama was one of them, right? He was part of the Gang of 14, and then they became Gang of 13, 12, 10. And then Republicans did the same thing. After 2012, they thought, well, we have to do something about immigration. In the so-called post-mortem, we're losing because we are not reaching out to Hispanic voters and others, and this is a winner issue. And you have Marco Rubio and others working on this issue, and then when he wants to run for president, he walks away. So this is a very tense issue because there's enough of a group of voters, as we saw from this year, mobilized by the idea of the wall, that there's no clarity here, and both sides are putting everything on the table, and so I really wonder whether there's going to be an ability to come to.
Next question.
Hi. This really isn't like related to like presidents really at all. But like, why would when a government like makes a budget like not have it be for like the whole year? Like, why would they leave a gap so it shuts down? Like, what's the incentive to not have it just like, like just keep on going?
It is for a whole year.
But then why does it like shut down? Like that's like my question.
Well, that's the problem. And the fiscal year is October 1st.
And instead we have these continuing resolutions.
And that's been happening for a long time, but everybody knew you'd work it out, or in a case when Newt Gingrich played chicken with Bill Clinton and lost and shut down. And the president's almost always going to win that, as the Democrats just learned in the last shutdown. But there is a year. The problem is a fundamental problem of working out the issues and coming up with a budget, and because you could pass continuing resolutions. So there's always a procedure. For decades, October 1st, they didn't have the budget. So you'd wait a month or so and you'd pass and everybody got together. And it would happen. It was not on time. It was almost never on time in modern times. But now, because of the polarization, almost the norm has been to just.
And there's, budget appropriations bills, to get into the weeds a little bit, are not normally things you can filibuster by Senate rule. As a consequence, this is a demonstration of even internal Republican problems, that they should be able to blow through, appropriate things pretty easily. But there's division within that party as well on some of these issues. And so it's a real issue, the fact that the United States hasn't had a pure budget since 2009, really. Just kind of punting around and doing this stuff. Doing, again, brinksmanships of that we saw in 2011 and 2013, where we kind of give everyone the poison pill, so we'll work out a deal, and instead we end up with a poison pill with limited military spending, limited domestic spending, and all sorts of things. So it's an unhealthy place we're at because of that, and this demonstrates by both your excellent questions. You guys are scratching your head. We came up where it was almost the opposite. We looked at politicians and saying, well, you guys, it's got it too easy. You don't stand up for anything. So you get this, you get this, you get this, and everyone got what they wanted. And so it's a very weird place that we're at. I don't know if you agree, but it's very different.
Yeah, it's another strange thing. A lot of folks think now that in order to pass a bill in the Senate, you need 60, because it was a time when the Republicans were in a minority. Anything the Democrats would suggest, they would just threaten a filibuster. No matter what. It can be something that they weren't so much opposed to. They just do it on the principle of messing up the Democrats. And so it seems like that. And the Democrats, can threaten the same thing back. But now it's just so disjointed that it appears that 60 votes is what you need rather than 51. You just need 60 to invoke cloture to shut off the filibuster.
And ironically, real quick, the one point where we had potential bipartisanship was on this very issue, when they put the continuing resolution back in September, that Donald Trump went against his own budget director and said, well, I'm going to go with Chuck and Nancy. And everyone's like, wow, maybe he's going to be the deal maker. And then obviously, the congressional people got in and said, you can't do that. And as a result, there's no Chuck, Nancy, and Donald, right? It's not going to happen.
We'll take one last question.
Hi, quick question. A lot of people do talk about this now with the Trump administration, and my question is: do you consider yourself proud to call Trump your president and to be a member of the United States?
I think this, in some respects, gets to the issue of head of state versus head of government.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Go
It's
ahead,
just institutional. Part of our issue is, we as Americans, as individualists, we've always had we've always questioned power and centralized power. So in some ways, when we see the questioning of power, I think that that's you know, a sign of our inner James Madison in some ways. But we've also had presidents act presidential, and in turn, the American public has rallied around presidents in ways. But this has been building for years, right? So Donald Trump might be, he's certainly, as I mentioned, not maybe making the effort as head of state, but we've seen the American public move away from presidents. We've seen athletes not want to go to the White House to be with the president here and there, and this has been building over time. And so I would love to see people accept the end of the election results and move on and recognize a president as president, even if you disagree with the president, that there's something about the presidency and the institutions, because it weakens what is a fragile system in many ways. It's a great constitution with a lot of principles behind it, but it needs people to live up to the norms that are behind it as well, and we're blowing through norms left and right. Partially, President Trump is doing that, but the American public has, and we've encouraged, due to this polarization, people to act a little nasty to presidents for the last couple decades, right? Michael Jordan didn't go to the White House when President George H.W. Bush was there. You know, this it builds up after a time. I think it's an expectation then. There's rewards for it.
If you would please give our panelists a round of applause. That's Jim Lutz, Elliot Barkey, Mike Wolf, James Toole, and Craig Ortsey.